I've always been really passionate about wellness and mental health. And I thought, okay, could I bring some of those tricks that I've learned from TV to help kind of with this male mental health crisis? And there's a lot of talk from charities, correctly so, encouraging men to talk. We want to encourage men to talk at Mettle, but equally, what I was thinking is, why don't I take that TV idea that you've got to meet people where they are? So rather than watching a documentary about disability, they're watching dating shows. Rather than watching a documentary about homelessness, they're watching survival shows. Let's deliver our message through one of the more popular forms of entertainment. If men aren't currently talking, what are they doing? And they're on their phones. You've got to meet people where they are.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Healthtech Podcast. With me today, I have Neil Smith. Now, Neil is formerly one of Britain's most successful TV executives, is now CEO and founder of Mettle, the men's fitness app, co-founded with adventurer Bear Grylls, who I'm sure everybody has heard of, and Dr. Alex George, former Love Island, currently the UK government's mental health ambassador. And obviously, at this time of crisis, tackling men's mental health is an incredible thing to do, giving all men the permission and the tools they need to be happier, healthier, and more successful. So, Neil, it's an absolute pleasure, mate. How are you doing?
I'm good, James. Yeah, whenever I do a podcast, I always get like an immediate kind of tickle in my throat. It's kind of like, so I need to go like that, you know. It's like I've been fine all day, and I've noticed every single podcast. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be like my catchphrase, I think. It must be some kind of like autonomic.
Just clear your throat every time you introduce yourself. Just clear your throat before it, and it becomes like what an auditory signature? Is that the new term?
That's my auditory signature. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
So apart from the tickle in the throat,
clear my throat for me in the future.
Well, that's it. You can AI is doing everything these days. But yeah, other than the tickle in the throat, how are you? How's your week been?
Survived another week in tech, huh?
Yeah, that has to be the barrier. Honestly.
Looking forward to seeing my son tonight, who's been on his first residential at the age of 11. First time he's been away from his parents for any.
What's he been doing? At camp or something?
You know, like they do kind of abseiling and outdoor activities,
building
and all
rafts.
That type of stuff. Yeah, and then obviously he'll be back, and it'll be back to football, watching the football. So yeah, it's a weekend of football and tennis, both playing both activities and watching them for this weekend. So I'm really looking forward to that, actually.
Very nice. Very nice. So listen, mate, the way that we start this podcast is for you to tell your story. Now, you've got a hell of a story. Obviously, we met at Health. We had, I'd actually say probably my most interesting conversation that I had at Health, largely because of your background and everything that you were up to and your route into this. So I'm pumped for our listeners to hear this story. Obviously, being a TV producer, producing shows that we have all heard of, but actually you doing so as a means of actually creating impact in healthcare, which I think was such an interesting tie-in to your whole story. And now obviously going on to being a health tech founder. It's an incredible story. I'm not going to spoil it any more than I have, but for the benefit of our listeners, mate, why don't you tell us all your story and tell us the long version?
How long you got?
We've got about an hour.
Don't want to
maybe not too long.
And viewers off by promising them anything too long. Yeah, so look, my background, as you say, James, you know, I'm a TV producer by trade. I'm a creative, so I started out as a kind of producer, director, shooting programs, having an amazing life. I kind of filmed shows all over the world. You know, got to some points where I didn't even need to rent anywhere to live. I was just, you know, jetting around and having a great time. I ended up becoming quite successful at it and pitching a number of shows that got me kind of to a creative director position in the company. And then I ended up running those companies, or that company, and then I went on to a really big company. So the last company I ran made The Apprentice and Grand Designs and Escape to the Country and Railway Journeys and Snowflake Mountain for Netflix. And previously to that, I ran another company called Betty, which was a sort of trailblazing indie. It was the most diverse indie on and off screen in the whole of the UK. And we made shows like The Undateables, I guess is our best known show, but also lots of stuff with Bear Grylls, which is how kind of Bear and I started working together. And I've had probably more fun with him jumping out of planes in jungles than is right to be had on a normal working day. But yeah, so that's been my journey. I'm a content producer, storyteller, turned commercial person, but always been a creative. And the things that I've always really loved doing. So I've overseen some of these big shows like The Apprentice and stuff, but the things that I've personally loved creating and getting to screen have always, as you kind of alluded to, been shows that take a really important yet potentially difficult subject matter to a mass audience through an entertaining construct. Yeah, so I call it, hiding the good stuff or smuggling in the vegetables, if you like. So, The Undateables that we just referenced is a really good example of that. When we were making that show, it's kind of like if we'd have made a documentary about people with disabilities, by the nature of that format, only people who are interested in people with disabilities would have watched that documentary, and maybe 200,000 people. And that would have, been fine, but it wouldn't really have kind of changed perceptions of disability, which we really wanted to do. We wanted to tell the story that disabled people want to and do have romantic relationships and find love and have children, which actually, in the time when we started making that a couple of decades ago, wasn't commonly held wisdom. Yeah. And so rather than making a documentary, we made a dating show. Yeah. So dating is the biggest genre in the world. And instead of getting 200,000 viewers, that shows, I think it's been ran for like 20 seasons, sold all over the world, got made everywhere, remade everywhere from France to Ukraine. Netflix tried to buy it, made their own version called Love on the Spectrum. It earned the company tens of millions of pounds, seen by over 100 million people globally. But in doing so, it changed perceptions of disability. When I left that company, I remember speaking to Changing Faces, who are a disfigurement charity, and they said, look, 20 years of marketing budget could never even got close to the changes that have occurred due to this TV show. And I love doing those sort of things. And, I'd actually come from another company where I developed a show called Britain's Missing Top Model, which was one of the first shows in its space. And Britain's Missing Top Model was, we saw that there was no disabled models at the time. It was like, well, why is that? And so it's like, well, let's raise awareness. If we'd made a documentary saying, well, aren't there any disabled models? It would have been dead boring and nobody watched it. And instead we were like, well, why don't we just have sort of copy, that kind of format like America's Top Model and a bit of Big Brother, and get loads of aspiring models to live in a house while competing for a big modeling contract and a photography session with Rankin. And we had like, the front cover of like Marie Claire or Vogue or something like that. And so anyway, we put all these aspiring models, all who had disabilities, into this flat. And it was groundbreaking because guess what? Some of them weren't nice. Yeah? And to see people with disabilities being nasty was something that was completely new on television. It was like it humanized people. So it wasn't disabled people, there to be kind of, poor them, they must be pitied. They always must be nice because they're in this situation. Well, no, that's importantly, that was a stereotype that we helped break down, which the disabled community welcomed, that people are people, even with disabilities. They're not unidimensional. Yeah. And the other thing they did was they had sex, and it's kind of like, well, disabled people having sex, And anyway, it brought a big audience and, a greater understanding to a really important, issue. I've done quite a bit in that space. So funnily enough, in health, I bumped into Lucy Jones, who is now chief clinical officer at a big kind of health tech firm. And she was like a presenter on a show that I produced called The Food Hospital. Now, The Food Hospital was about treating illnesses with food rather than medicine. Now, at the time when we did it, it was kind of a revolutionary idea, and we had to like advisory boards up to the hilt kind of thing. But we did it as a big, noisy kind of factual entertainment show, and it made a big difference and helped progress the kind of cause of dietetics, which is now, of course, we think that what you eat has an influence on your health and can affect disease and stuff. But at the time, that wasn't kind of commonly known knowledge. More recently, I noticed that homelessness in London had kind of, really accelerated. I thought, okay, well, let's see if we can kind of, draw a new audience to the problem of homelessness. And so I called up Ed Stafford, who's a survivalist, he was the first man to walk across the Amazon. And he does a show on Discovery called Marooned, where he spends 60 days and 60 nights on a desert island with nothing but a camera. And I'm like, Ed, you're ex-military, suffered mental health problems, adopted, male, all risk factors for ending up on the streets. Why don't we just do your format, 60 days and nights, but rather than on a desert island, we'll do it on the streets of London, Manchester and Glasgow over a British winter. Yeah. And he spent 60 days and nights without his family. He missed his son's first birthday or first Christmas. He missed his birthday with him and all this sort of thing. Ed is a very authentic adventurer, so he kind of goes fully immersed. And he lived a fully immersed life surviving homelessness. And by just taking that kind of different view on it and kind of adrenalizing it, really, we brought a whole new audience. And that was Channel 4's biggest new series, I think, for about 5 years. But also, brought around some kind of legislation change as well. So I've always been really passionate about this idea of kind of bringing important subject matters that are potentially a bit taboo or off-putting to big audiences, new audiences, through kind of entertaining twists. That's kind of been my passion in TV.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, outside of TV, like just as why I'm doing what I'm doing now, and outside of TV, I've always been really passionate about wellness and mental health because, that's been my journey. And I thought, okay, could I bring some of those tricks that I've learned from TV to help kind of with this male mental health crisis, which is, sadly, in a very bad place, with suicide being the biggest killer of men under 50 in the UK and the US. And that is just a shocking statistic. And you have to think, well, how did we get here? And sadly, it's getting worse rather than better, even since we've had awareness of it. So, so that's sort of, my TV background anyway.
It's a heck of a story, man. And before we go into everything that you're doing with Mettle, one thing that you've talked about in absolute buckets there is this notion of entertainment as a vehicle to deliver impact in healthcare. And I think we're at a point now where the standard of the delivery of information and the standard that has to be in order for people to receive that information and care enough to listen to it and to simply just make the choice to listen to it, the standards are just going up and up and up and up and up. And so your skill set of being able to understand how to create entertainment in a way that can deliver on that impact in healthcare, I think is such an incredibly valuable skill set. We're seeing it now with I've talked about this a lot, but the rise of the TikTok influencer, the doctors that are using TikTok to deliver healthcare information to the public, they're getting expert at delivering that information incredibly quickly into super short TikToks that's evidence-based and high quality and all these things. And they're learning a very specific skill there. Yours is in that sort of long form and entertainment and that kind of hiding the vegetables kind of way of like, actually, this is a pure entertainment show, but I'm going to make you care about people with disability. I'm going to teach you about the day-to-day struggles of people with disability. And in fact, I'm going to bust taboos and you're not even going to notice. Like that's a heck of a skill set, which I love. And I love what that charity said to, 20 years of marketing budget, we wouldn't have even scratched the surface of what you've been able to do in an incredibly short space of time. I think that it's such an incredible skill set. So I guess what I'm interested in is, what are the ingredients? In fact, before I say that, the reason I'm going to ask this question is there are lots of companies in healthcare, lots of health tech companies that want to not necessarily sell to the public, although in some cases they'll want to sell to the public because they've got a B2C product. But often they want the public to care about a cause or to care about their product in some way in order to ask their GP, why can't I get this thing? Can you guys do it for me to, generate some bottom up demand or whatever? So I guess for people that are building companies or products that want to get the public to care about them, like, what are the ingredients to creating content that means people will care about something that ordinarily in documentary style would be incredibly boring? Like, what's the journey of discovery that you go on to find the story? Because again, you talked about the value being storytelling. So like, can you talk a little bit about that for me?
I'd say number one is you got to meet people where they are. Yeah. So you just referred to the doctors on TikTok. Yeah. If they were putting that content, on the Women's Institute magazine or the Salvation Army, or I don't know, like the BMJ, or like just some really, academic place. Yes, that's
where,
right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it wouldn't be right. Yeah. It's all about what, so like, for example, with Mettle. So we saw that there was a male mental health crisis, and I'll go into why it's important to me in a bit, but we saw that there was this male mental health crisis. And there's a lot of talk from charities, correctly so, encouraging men to talk. Yeah. So men need to talk. Yeah. Men aren't good at talking. So one of the main reasons that we're in this crisis is because men struggle with communicating their emotions. Yeah. And talking to other people about their issues and problems. And that's because over millennia, we've been taught not to. We've been taught to be strong and invulnerable, yeah? And so sharing problems makes us, in general, and I'm going to generalize here, feel vulnerable, yeah? I've been one of those men who felt vulnerable about talking about my health. So I really understand that. And men feel vulnerable, they don't go in the space, yeah? So they won't go to where you want them to be. Yeah, so they won't necessarily want to go to therapy or tell their doctor they might be suffering from depression, which happened to me. Or, but it is true that some men will literally take their problems to the grave. And sadly, we all knew people who lost friends, or we knew people we'd lost, who were men who took their own lives. And nobody knew it was coming. Nobody saw it coming. Yeah, because they hadn't told anybody. Yeah, it's a very, very common thing. Yeah, and so there's a lot of messaging, positive messaging out there saying men need to talk. And there's a lot of great people like Andy's Man Club who did an amazing job in kind of helping them with that. But changing behaviour. This is by way of answering your question. Changing people's behaviour is a slow process. Yeah. So it's like getting them to watch the documentary. It'll work, yeah, but it takes a long time. Yeah, it's kind of, we want to encourage men to talk at Mettle, but equally, what I was thinking is, okay, look, why don't I take that TV idea that you've got to meet people where they are? So rather than watching a documentary about disability, they're watching dating shows. Rather than watching a documentary about homelessness, they're watching survival shows. Let's deliver our message through one of the more popular forms of entertainment. So I thought, okay, well, look, if men aren't currently talking, what are they doing? And they're on their phones. Yeah. So I thought, okay, well, can I create an app using a toolkit of all the things that I use on a daily basis that doesn't require them to talk? So I'm meeting them where they are. Yeah. So I'm meeting them where they are, which is on their phones, not talking. Let's give them some content that can help them take control of their own mental health and mental fitness, and hopefully then they never get to a bad point with their mental health. And if they do, we can point them in the right direction and be part of that, that struggle to improve men's mental health. So number one, meeting people where they are. The doctors on TikTok are doing well because they're on TikTok and have learned to use that format. Yeah, it's kind of like that. don't fight the tide. Yeah, I would say. Some of the most successful, like Britain's Got Talent. So I used to run a company. The Apprentice company was Fremantle company, world's biggest distributor. We made America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent stuff.
Wow.
And Britain's Got Talent is one of the most diverse shows on television. Yeah, arguably that has done more to make just an ordinary family sitting in their home on a Saturday night more aware of the diversity we have in this country, or the X Factor, than any other TV show. Yeah, if you made a documentary asking people to be more diverse, aware, or kind of, it wouldn't have worked. Yeah, so it's about, okay, how do you change perception? So you've got to meet people where they are. That's number one. Yeah. And then you can hide the vegetables. If you've got quite a difficult pill, it's sugaring the pill, isn't it? If you've got a difficult pill to swallow, give them a spoonful of sugar with the, to help the medicine go down. I mean, this is like age-old wisdom, yeah? I think that's Mary Poppins or something. I think brand is really important. If you stop it, because brands create trust. Yeah. So as you see, I'm wearing my Mettle T-shirt. What was really important to me is that we built a brand that men felt comfortable with. Yeah. That they wanted to be associated with. They didn't feel ashamed or vulnerable. It's something they feel proud of, and that's what we're seeing from the men who use our app and buy our T-shirts and wear our caps, from our shop and, and talk about it in the gym. Yeah. It's kind of, we're building a brand. Brands mean trust. Yeah. So if you've got a brand and it's a good brand, then you build trust. So people listen to what you're saying. You create community. So people, think, okay, well, my mate told me about that. And, and now I'm going to use it and I feel part of that community. We're just beginning our steps into the community piece of what we're doing. But I think all those are important. It's not just about having, a snappy scriptwriter or
of course,
filming it on an angle or whatever people used to do when they wanted to make TV 20 years ago. It's kind of like meeting people where they are and trying to establish a strong brand. And if you think about it, that's why influencers are so successful. Because they meet people where they are, here on social media, on their phones, and they establish themselves as brands, that you trust. And that's where you get your information from, for good or for bad.
One point that you raised there for me was, and I'm sort of going back a little bit, but it's actually the power of those networks and media companies with what they select to be aired. There's actually there's a lot of power in that decision making for kind of just general sort of social discourse, because what they do choose, if it does indeed go on to be successful, there's obviously power in those companies like you were running that are choosing to create those shows and that kind of thing, or to pitch certain shows to get the funding, whatever. Like, there's power there, but there's also power in the selection. I'm just interested now, because I just genuinely don't know the answer to this question. Is there a link between, let's say, the Department for Health and Social Care and those TV networks? Is there any relationship there whatsoever that, I don't know, Wes Streeting might just come around and say, like, look, guys, we actually need a lot of GPs. That show that you ran a while ago that was like 24 hours in a GP practice did really well. Like, we have a few more GP trainees. Is there anything that we, like, is there any sort of conversation there, like, or does that become a bit nanny state of like the government like influencing our entertainment and brainwashing us?
I've always been a producer, so I've been the guy selling the ideas and making.
Okay.
So I haven't been on the channel side.
Yeah. Okay.
What I would say is it often works the other way around. Yeah, whereby, as far as I know, so we don't often have the channel come to us, or a channel come to us and say, could you make this very thing? They'll say, oh, we want something in this area.
Right.
I don't think it's as a direct result of, say, the health secretary kind of asking.
Yeah.
What can happen, though, is, for example, let's say there was a show, I think there was a show on Channel 4 a while ago about the Navy. Yeah. So Navy kind of recruits.
Yeah.
So a production company would go to the Navy and say, we want to make a show about you. And the Navy would think, okay, well, this is going to be a good time for us to do it because it will increase our exposure and recruitment. And the police are the same. The police do a lot of shows with TV companies because they want to build sympathy for the police and rebuild trust, which may have been broken through incidents like the Sarah Cousins and Wayne Everett. So it's that's sort of how it works. It's often production companies, of which there are many, 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 with a lot of clever people working there, forging relationships with national institutions.
Yeah, understood.
I think it's normally that way around.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. It's just, it's really interesting to me that, just because I think, it's definite double-edged sword anyway.
But you're right. Those channels have had a lot of influence on how we think as a culture. I mean, The Undateables is a really good example.
Exactly.
That literally helped people understand that people who are disabled still wanted to find love. So that's one tiny example.
Especially because of where like the BBC sits as well. I'm sort of like, surely if they need to raise GP numbers, someone could have a chat to the commissioner of the BBC and be
I'm probably, that might well happen.
Yeah.
Of the tree, with Tim Davies, obviously who's the Director General, is often obviously in close communication with Parliament because they oversee the BBC Charter, etc. Yeah. And are constantly trying to abolish the licence fee and all the rest of it. So yes, although they have to be independent as well. So the people, probably aren't allowed by their own charter to kind of take
right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So if it is there, it's not obvious.
There's probably a lot of good to be done with that, but similarly, it does open it up to not so good things being done, I guess. But anyway,
but also it does come back to those traditional broadcasters are now losing power to the streamers, obviously,
streaming services,
and to social media,
yeah.
So, I mean, we all know people who can argue very well for terrible conspiracy theories, which are clearly untrue, but they're so well loaded with information that they've got from social media that they've always got an answer for everything. Do you see what I mean? And it's kind of like, and that's those channels now have a really important kind of impact. I mean, like we're slightly getting off health tech here, but Donald Trump uses his voice very well, or used, certainly, when he was all over social media to kind of influence opinion, and, most of that he did through Twitter as it was.
We say it's off health tech, but I do think like this balance of power thing with the distribution of information is so important for us right now in healthcare and health tech, because misinformation is huge. Social media platforms are big tech platforms that clinicians, and on the other side, good clinicians that are good actors, but also bad clinicians that are bad actors that are trying to sell something, or even just bad actors in general that are not clinical whatsoever. Like everyone's allowed to make content on platforms, and people can gather followings based on emotion that you've talked about, and they can build brand and they can build trust with people and then deliver misinformation through that trust. So I think it is adjacent to health tech, this, but I think the concepts that we can learn from the creative industries of how to create good content, how to hide the vegetables, how to do all these things, like it's kind of what the good clinicians are doing on tech platforms. They are hiding the vegetables. They're hiding the vegetables behind like some hilarious video about farts or something, and then they're delivering some really good information about the microbiome and things to eat and not to eat, or like signs of cancer. But they hooked you with this like hilarious video of blah, 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 like, or viral video that they've then stitched or whatever. So like these are all tips and techniques from the creative industries that some clinicians are adopting to deliver good health information via a tech platform. And I think it's interesting because like I toyed with this at the, the beginning of social media, and especially when TikTok came out and clinicians started integrating of like, is this health tech? Should I really be talking about this? I honestly think it's impossible not to, because it's such a huge wave of the new delivery of information via big tech platforms that I just don't think is going anywhere. So I think there is so much to learn from everything you're saying.
Well, COVID was a massive battleground that, the delivery of information, of health information through social media became such a contentious thing during that time that obviously social media had to step in and say this, post contains controversial information about COVID.
The responsibility of the platforms at that point.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
Which is very unusual.
Yeah.
For them to kind of, get involved in that way. But that was kind of, if you like, the first ever example of them doing.
Well, it's funny that because I've been speaking about this like quite recently, that like I think that opens up a really interesting conversation especially with content and creative, which is like, where's the line between talking about a new theory, or let's put it this way, not being allowed to talk about a theory versus the fact you are, and censorship? At what point does it become censorship? At what point does it become like, well, you're just acting on the information you've got and saying that it's not right. I'm acting in the information that I've got and I'm saying it is right. And at what point do you go like, is it censorship? Is it this? Is it that? Is it that? But it all comes down to definitions and like what is hate, but like versus like this, or like it's such it's a minefield that I'd rather not us get into for the next half an hour, if I'm honest. But
all I will say is, and let's not get into this, and then you chuck AI in.
Oh God, yeah.
It becomes 10 times harder. And that's
because of volume, and that's where we are now. And I think that's slightly separate point, but sort of related. I'm going to put a thing on our website this weekend that's just like, look, I can tell if your application is written by AI. Please don't apply for jobs and use AI. And that's just an application process, let alone like the volume of information and virtual influencers now, like literally AI digital influencers, like entirely just made up characters that are just going to be the face of brands and all that sort of stuff. That can say what they like. It's wild. It's wild what it's just going to do for health information, man. And like, I actually think, like, to segue us into Mettle now, like. The interesting thing that you said about brand and trust, again, I'm having conversations about this as well, of like, in healthcare, we want things to, we have this desire that we want things to be human. At some point, we want them to be human. Like, we prefer to interact with humans where we can, but digital has a role. Digital has a role in triage. It has a role in taking some things off the human's plate, like one-to-one therapy and stuff can't be done by absolutely everyone. There's a role for it and this, that, and the other. But like, it's so important that we basically build brands of trust that have credible information going to them. And obviously that's what you talked about previously with like, how do you meet people where they are? Well, actually, you literally go where they are on their phone, and now you create an app that's worth opening. Now you deliver something that's going to be of value to them. You build a connection between the person and the app and the brand and all that sort of stuff. And then you chuck the vegetables in. Then you're going to give the value. Then you're going to give them everything that they need, and they're going to have this emotional connection to it. So with all that in mind, can you tell me the story of starting Mettle, like the idea, how you turned an idea into reality, how you get co-founders, like, I imagine you knew them, but you did, like Bear Grylls, Alex George, talk me through those initial days, because I think that'd be quite a fun thing to talk about.
I will, yeah. First though, just want to touch on that point you made about brands, of building brands that you trust. A good example would be the NHS.
Yeah.
So the NHS, is a brand that traditionally we in this country, like the BBC actually, the NHS is in a much worse state.
Yeah.
Those have been our two big brands.
Yeah.
As a company, you go to another country, you go to America, and you're proud of the BBC and you're proud of the NHS. Yeah. Like, they are our two biggest brands. Now, the NHS defines us. And you've got a nice kind of warm smile on your face, thinking about
honestly,
what they mean to you.
What it means, yeah.
And then those brands become compromised. So the NHS has become compromised. Yeah. And now we don't trust it anymore because we're worried if an ambulance is going to turn up or whether our operation is going to get cancelled or if we're going to have to spend 24 hours on a gurney in a hospital waiting room. Yeah. That not only undermines our trust in that brand, the NHS, but also undermines our whole belief in our society. Yeah, because our society is built on brands like the BBC and the NHS and what we believe it is, the good things about being British. And actually, Keir Starmer referred to this in his acceptance, in his first speech outside Downing Street. And he said, look, if I asked a lot of you, do you think the future is going to be better than the past? Yeah. Whether you still live in a good country. I can't remember how he kind of phrased it. A lot of you sadly will say, no, I'm going to rebuild that. So he's very much understands how important it is to rebuild brands of trust. Yeah, and that's going to be his mission. If he does that, he'll win. Yeah, because by losing our faith in the NHS, we see the UK as part of the reason we see the UK as a bit broken. Yeah, so it reflects our whole personality, and that's the power of brands and trust, and it can be fundamental, not just to when I want to go to the hospital, but my everyday life. I don't think Britain's such a great place to live anymore. I'm not as proud of it when I go abroad. So that's the power of brands. And so, so why did we start Mettle? So I guess, just going back to those things that we talked about, me hiding the vegetables and all the rest of it, I effectively got disillusioned, I suppose, with running a big company. I guess I got bored. So my number one value is growth, which I discovered about myself through various leadership kind of workshops that I've done and all the rest of it. And my number one value is growth. Yeah. So I can't not grow. Yeah. And I don't mean in wealth and stature, because actually that's what I've given up. But I just mean in learning and helping other people grow as well in whatever form that might be.
Just to touch on that before you move on, actually, those are the things you've given up. Yeah. What's that been like for you? I think this is quite relatable. Well, yeah, right. Because I think this is quite relatable for people that find themselves on a path, getting quite far in that path, having some element of notoriety in their industry, knowing it's not right for them, whether that's investment banking, whether that's law, whether that's medicine, whether that's like one of these, like a million different things it could be. But there's a lot of people in this situation where they go to work, everyone knows who they are. Like that feels good, but ultimately they just feel disconnected from the work and they want to start again. Like you did that. So can you just talk through that for me?
Yeah, I got to pretty much the top of my industry. I was respected in the industry. People liked me. I was a good producer. People trusted me. I was trustworthy. I was successful. I earned really a large amount of money on a yearly basis. I was one of the top paid producers in the UK. We're in one of the biggest companies in the world. Yeah, so there I was kind of running, this company. I made it to the top of my tree. I never expected to make it to the top of an industry. I didn't really try, actually. I've always just followed my growth, value and just grown. Yeah, and I've been fortunate and, I've got some talent and I've been lucky, which is normally the combination that gets you there. Yeah. And I got to the point where I was, and this is quite an honest thing to say, but I was literally kind of counting the money I'd earn each day to get me through the day. And I thought, okay, there's something fundamentally wrong here. Either I'm having a midlife crisis or, and I think actually I wasn't having a midlife crisis. I just wasn't growing anymore. Yeah. I'd become too comfortable. And I think I experienced something called second mountain syndrome, which is potentially occurs more in men, where you sort of feel like you've got to be a provider. You build and build and build, and you try and build up this security. For me, I came from quite a financially difficult background with not much money and a lot of financial problems. and that I think had an impact on me where I felt I've got to secure myself from that happening to me, subconsciously probably. And anyway, so I built a very secure environment, and then I got to the top of my mountain, I guess, which was career-wise, and then I'm like, oh shit, there's a second mountain over there, and that's actually the one I've got to climb. And it's called second mountain theory, and it's kind of when purpose becomes really important. Yeah, so I was creating shows for purpose, but I was also running a big company and dealing with, what are we going to pay for great railway journeys next year with the BBC? And do you know what I mean?
It's difficult to feel connected to the impact, because whilst you're making that impact and it's your company making it, you're quite a few stages removed from it. And I've heard that.
So you're too senior. So I thought, okay, I've got to go and, what am I passionate about? Well, I'm passionate about taking important ideas to mass audiences to create social change. So it's a cheesy phrase, but I wanted to make a difference in the world. I wanted to do that full time.
Yeah.
So I left that job and I went to set up my own production company, my own content company, let's call it, solely focused on creating entertainment with purpose. Yeah. So changing the world through entertainment. And the idea on my slate, as we call it, that I was most passionate about wasn't a digital idea. It wasn't a TV idea. It was a digital idea. Yeah. And it was to create a men's wellness platform. Yeah. So outside of work, my biggest constant in life, or my biggest passion in life, I guess, has been meditation, breath work, self-hypnosis. So the wellness space. Yeah. So I started meditating at the age of 11, which is very young
to be doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was prescribed meditation.
Interesting.
So I was born with a condition of the nervous system called benign intention tremor, which is tremor disorder.
Yeah.
Makes you shake. My uncle also has the condition. It's hereditary. And I had it really badly when I was a kid. And it's funny, anyway, I'll tell you the story of what happened. But, I got to the age where I was sort of 11 or 12, and my hands would shake so badly I couldn't get a teaspoon of sugar into a cup of tea.
Wow.
Yeah. Which was, in a way, good news because I don't take sugar now. Not great. Not a great look for a 12-year-old kid growing up in Wickham. And so anyway, my uncle went to, he'd sort of, he was quite a successful kind of businessman. He was in horse racing actually. And he kind of, so he sort of sought out some help from Harley Street and went to some doctors. And he literally kind of, I guess, found an enlightened doctor who said, look, there's nothing we can do for this condition, that we know of. But there is this thing called meditation we've heard of, which might help. And so he came back with these tapes, and they were called relaxation tapes, but they're meditation tapes, like mindful meditation. And I started listening to 30, 60 minutes a day. And it completely controlled my condition. And I have no visible symptoms to this day of a chronic, incurable condition that by the time I was 11 years old was that debilitating. And now if you see my uncle now, he kind of still shakes. It looks a bit like you have kind of Parkinson's, I guess. And that's kind of what I was doing. And for me, it just completely disappeared. Now, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, and I've got no idea, or a neuroscientist, and I have no idea why that happened. But for me, that was connected with the meditation that I was doing. But it's funny, I had a 50th birthday party recently, and my mates from school came, and and they were joking about me being shaky, and it was still,
of course,
40 or 38 years later, I'm still a kind of big gag, But anyway, so I really got into meditation, and I studied it. I spent years in India. One of the great things about having a career in TV, was I would only, when I was working as a director, which I loved, that was my favorite job, because there you're really kind of creating the story and telling the story. And that's when I was traveling all over the world and making incredible programs everywhere and having a brilliant time. I got to a point where I'm I'm only going to work 9 months a year, because I've got no overheads. I barely need to rent anywhere to live. I'm going to do 9 months, and I've had enough money for the year, more than enough. and I'm going to go and travel. And I spent a lot of time in India and Thailand studying meditation in various schools. So I spent a lot of time living with Himalayan yogis and in Tantra schools and in Buddhist schools and doing Vipassana, or I went on a Chardam pilgrimage. And so I really, really kind of got into it in a big way. In my 20s, so that was meditation. I also really got into breath work, which is, a brilliant way of transforming your physiological state. So I think breath work, like as a bloke, it's kind of like, you can say, I don't want to get into that hippie shit. It's like, well, look, try this breath work activity that the Navy SEALs do. It'll take you 90 seconds. Tell me how you feel afterwards. And it quickly transforms somebody's state.
Yes.
And you can't really argue with its efficacy.
The phrase Navy SEALs is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Like,
they are. So it's kind of like, which bit of that sentence is too emasculating for you that you won't try it.
Right.
Yeah? And so anyway, really got into breathwork. In my 20s, I suffered from depression quite badly, clinical depression. And, like a lot of men, maybe most, I didn't tell anybody about it. I suffered for a really long time and I was pretty highly functioning. I was still going out and being successful and all the rest of it. But inside, I was really struggling until I got to a place where I eventually, I don't know how I ended up there, but I ended up at a clinical hypnotist. And I was sort of hypnotized out of depression. And it never came back.
I remember at med school in Nottingham, you could do a special study module in clinical hypnosis, and I know a couple of people that did it, who they had their minds blown, like literally they had their minds blown. I think one of them wanted to do it, the other one didn't want to do it, and ended up doing it. But I remember like both saying like, actually, guys, like there's quite a lot in this. It's worth you looking at it, sort of thing. Like, yeah.
Well, it was life-changing for me.
Wow.
And anyway, I happened to mention this because I couldn't speak about it before. But afterwards, I ended up, I think I was in Ibiza, where I spent quite a lot of time making TV shows, which was fun. And speaking to a colleague, and I told him what had happened to me in this, with this hypnotist. And he said to me, I wouldn't mind speaking to him. And anyway, he went to see this hypnotist, and afterwards he came to me and said, "You saved my life, thank you," because I was planning on taking my own life. I've been really depressed, and so that to me, I'll be eternally grateful for that because it literally saved somebody's life. So anyway, big fan of self-hypnosis. Love all the Paul McKenna stuff, and Paul McKenna is one of our co-founders as well. He's the
wow,
most successful hypnotist and provides all the hypnosis content on the app. So here I am. I've got, passion for kind of meditation. I've got a passion for breathwork, self-hypnosis, for helping men overcome, like the difficulties that I did. And one day I'm talking to one of my mates and I'm thinking, and he's struggling with his mental health. I'm trying to talk to him about it, or talked about some of the things that are working for me. So I use these things on a daily basis and I'm in a really good place. Yeah, they create resilience in me. Yeah. And I noticed that him and actually somebody else I spoke to just didn't want to engage. They don't want to engage in talking about their mental health. It's a taboo subject. So my mate's kind of typical kind of, lower middle class, working class background, whatever it might be, done pretty well in life, will look after their physical fitness, talk to them about mental health, and they kind of stare into their pints and want to know what time the football's on. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's a taboo subject. I thought, that's interesting because I'm a taboo buster. That's what I do. Yeah. I want to kind of, take important subjects and bring them to mass audiences and bust taboos. Yeah. And I realized that the reason my mates wouldn't engage with me is because they felt vulnerable. Yeah. Around their mental health. And I felt vulnerable and I never talked about mine. So I really related to that. Yeah. And then you look at this kind of big male mental health crisis, which we talked about earlier, men being the biggest killer of men under 50 and not wanting to talk because they feel vulnerable. Yeah. So they feel men have been taught over millennia not to be vulnerable. So it's like, okay, well, could I do what I've done in TV and bring this really important subject matter, which is men's mental health, to a mass audience and give them sort of just and break down those barriers, and so they don't feel vulnerable. And the way to do that, as I said, is to meet them where they are. Yeah. So, where are they? Well, as we discussed, they're on their phones and they're not wanting to talk. So let's create something that doesn't require them to talk. So that's going to be an app. Yeah. And let's work out why they're not using the stuff that's already out there. Yeah. So what are the pain points? So we looked at the market and, you've got 20,000 wellness apps out there on the market, not a single one built for men. Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, the wellness market's saturated. Well, not really. Because if you're a bloke, who has a specific problem, there's nothing. Yeah. So it's kind of like male mental health is something that occurs to men. Yeah. So you need just as, but it affects everybody. So we always say, look, we're for everyone. Yeah. Our mission is to help men be better because we believe if men are better, the world is better. Yeah. So it's for everyone. Yeah. Some of our biggest supporters are women because it really affects them. But often, sometimes more than it actually affects the men themselves. Do you know what I mean? When you're talking about relationship stuff and anger issues and all that sort of stuff. So it's like, okay, well, what can we do here? Why is there nothing for men? Yeah. So men need specific solutions, it would seem to me, just as women need specific solutions for menopause. Yeah. But nobody's providing them, or not in an accessible way. So there did seem to be a gap in the market. So that's a commercial opportunity because I always see myself as a commercial hippie. Do you know what I mean? Like I make, those things, those programs that we referred to also have made a shit ton of money, which a documentary doesn't make anything. So let's not forget there's a commercial aspect, which means you can raise money and all the rest of it.
It's tight. It can be, it can be very, very, very closely tied to impact because it's value. The two shades of value, isn't it?
And actually, I spent quite a bit of time. So forgive me if my ADHD brain diverts, but, I remember sitting on I was part of the diversity panel at the Edinburgh TV Festival. Yeah. Now, sitting on a diversity panel as a white, middle-aged, heterosexual, now middle-class male is quite an odd feeling. But I ran the most diverse production company in the UK, both on and off screen. It was the most diverse production company. So we put in the most diverse representations of people on screen, but also we had the most diverse workforce. And so they invited me on. And my whole thing was about, look, you can make an impact. Diversity is not just a kind of tick box exercise, which literally it was becoming in TV because people said, well, we won't commission you to do this program unless you've got this amount of diversity, which is which is a good thing. But it was becoming, people were thinking, oh God, I've got to, be diverse. Yeah. I said, look, diversity is not only the right thing to do, but it's also a really good thing to do because you get diversity of thought. Yeah, and diversity of thought leads to greater creativity, which means you're going to win in a creative battle. Yeah, so the commercial rewards are going to be bigger than if you just still thought the same. So it's kind of like, it's a real commercial imperative to kind of be diverse. Yeah, there's 20,000 wellness apps out there on the market, none for men. Let's build one. Yeah, there's a commercial opportunity there. Why aren't men using the stuff that's on the market? Like Calm and Headspace, which are brilliant apps, but they skew 80% female. A lot of blokes, if you like, who are the ones who are being affected by the mental health crisis, by which I mean, we tested with the blokes and the wokes. I'm a bit of a woke, but I'm also a bloke.
Interesting.
By origin. and actually, the blokes are the ones who are suffering most in the mental health crisis, yet they're not the ones who feel that there's anything for them. So we asked them, why aren't you using the apps on the market? And 3 answers came back: 2 female, 2 hippiest, there's nothing wrong with me. Yep. So all those things make men feel vulnerable. 2 female, they see those products as 2 female. If they're already feeling about, oh, should I go into this? No, that's for women. I'm not going to go there. I feel vulnerable. And actually, all the science. So we've been working. We co-founded the app with Imperial College. We co-designed the app with Imperial College. We've worked with the founders of Movember. We're also going to be. We've also been working with the Maudsley in the form of the NHS. And
nice!
It's like their first ever verified app, which is great. And actually, the evidence shows that men respond better to gender-specific mental health interventions. Second objection, too hippie-ish. Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a hippie, but nobody needs that. Yeah, it's kind of like, let's just strip out all the bullshit. So we got really kind of straight talking people on there. And it's really kind of all science-backed, clinically checked. And the third thing, there's nothing wrong with me. So we do talk about mental health, but also about mental fitness. So we're trying to build an aspirational brand, aspirational toolkit, where you come not just to kind of, reduce stress and anxiety, all those things are on there, and improve your sleep, but also to build confidence, energy, focus, be happy and more successful.
Yeah.
So it's a really kind of, we're trying to build an aspirational tool and remove those barriers. So I had this idea, and then it became my burning passion. Yeah. And like that idea just loomed bigger on my kind of slate than any other. And around that time, I thought, right, I'm going to speak to Bear Grylls about it, because Bear and I have made loads of shows all over the world, and he's great fun. And, he's an inspiration to millions of people. And he's always said that it's not what's in here. I'm pointing to a bicep for those who are listening. That's going to get you through the tough times, is what's up here, pointing to your head. Although, in his case, a bit of brawn helps as well. And he's written 2 books on mental fitness. And, so I spoke to him about this. He said, this is a brilliant idea. Let's do it. And he came on as my co-founder, which really kind of helps. And he's kind of great on the kind of publicity side.
Yeah.
He's helped get us into Apple and Google and, spread the word. His job is to kind of spread the word. And he's also, in the app as well. So he kind of was my first co-founder. I'm not from a tech background, I'm from a content background. So how the hell do I build an app? Because I wouldn't know where to start. It's a content business. It still fits on my slate.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's content, yeah. And it's publishing, but I need different skills. So I joined like an accelerator thing called One Day, which is now like an MBA thing. It's kind of, and they help people with business ideas to kind of build them.
Great.
And I joined that, and my mentor there, Steph, a couple of weeks in said, I absolutely love this idea. I've got a son who I can really see this is such an important thing for people of his age, 21, I think, at the time. I'd love to come on board as your first investor and bring cash and sweat equity. So I thought, okay, great. That would really help.
Ideal. Yeah,
great. But that meant, well, wait a minute, I've got this TV company. I've got a production company. This is one of the ideas in it. How does that work? So, and I realized that because of the way TV and tech work and valuations in TV and tech, that my TV company, which was nascent, was worth, say, a couple of million on paper. Like this one idea could potentially be valued, in the end, it was valued at 10 million. Yeah. So it made sense and this was the thing that I felt I was born to do. Do you know what I mean? There was the confluence of all my skills and a lifetime of learning, my passions outside of work and my passions in work. It was my ikigai, it fitted in the center of that Venn diagram. I'm like, right, okay, well, let's start a new company and launch this app. Yep. So that's what I did. Awesome. So I founded a company, had Bear Grylls. Paul McKenna soon came on board, world's greatest and most, successful hypnotist. His books have helped millions of people, including me and loads of people I know. And funnily enough, he came on board because before, this was all after COVID, slightly after COVID, and I'd signed up for a course with him before I even had this idea. Yeah, and I was going to see him because I love NLP and hypnosis and stuff. And I'd signed up for a weekend with Paul McKenna kind of thing, like a conference. And it'd been cancelled loads of times because of COVID. And eventually it comes on, 2 years later. And I went to it. And like through the whole weekend, he only mentioned one famous person, and that was Bear Grylls. He was like, I was doing my podcast the other day, and Bear Grylls came on, and I asked him, why do you do those difficult things? And he said, well, for me, it's harder for me not to do them because I'll have more of a regret not trying them than the fear of doing them in the first place. Anyway, he referred to this thing. I thought, that's interesting. He's the only famous person who's mentioned all weekend. So at the end of it, I went up to him and said, look, I've got an idea about men's mental health, about how we can make a big impact using meditation, hypnosis, and breathwork. Bear Grylls, my co-founder, you mentioned. And he's like, yeah, I'm in. Come on, let's do it. So he was brilliant. He's like, yeah, I love it. And so he came on board, and he's provided all the content in the hypnosis section. Brilliant. It's all brilliant content. I guess my other, how we get a diverse group of co-founders on board. My other co-founder is Dr. Alex George. Now, Dr. Alex George, I think, is unique. Yeah. So as you say, he was on Love Island. Yeah. So he became famous for being on Love Island, and I never watched any of Love Island, but I did watch a few clips with him in it at the time because it was such a big show. And he was the sore thumb in Love Island. He was the sort of thing. He was a doctor, the fish out of water. He just didn't fit. Yeah. And so that's why he was interesting. Came out of Love Island, built a big Instagram following. And sadly, his brother, who's very close to, took his own life. And Alex really decided to dedicate his life to raising awareness around mental health. And he has done an incredible job, which a lot of people can't see what the impact he's actually had, but it's phenomenal. So he became the first ever UK government mental health ambassador. I think he's officially the youth mental health ambassador, but effectively there isn't another one. So, and, he's been driving kind of behind the scenes mental health change, which is going to continue with this government, which is brilliant. So he's been working on these mental health hubs for young people, which looks like the government are going to roll out nationally now, which he's been working on for years. So he's going to have a massive, massive impact on mental health in this country, which is fantastic. And like him, I was like, well, how do I get hold of him? And it's kind of like, this is where TV comes in useful, yeah? So he happened to be making a show for my old company. So I called up the people who are now running it, and I said, put me in touch with Alex. And so they said, he's like, oh, who's this Neil guy? And they said, oh, no, he's all right. He's a good egg.
Yeah.
And so we started talking, and Alex loved it. And he said, this is 100% what we need to be doing.
Yeah. And
he's just such a brilliant co-founder. And he came on as a significant investor as well. So he's put his own money, and he's got significant skin in the game. And he's brilliant. Yeah. So, I really, really respect what he's chosen to do with his life and how it's exactly what you were talking about before, James. That is the perfect example. Here is somebody who has a brand through this new medium of Instagram, social media, who built trust, and he's chosen to communicate a message through that platform, and people trust him. And that's quite something. So that's kind of my diverse bunch of co-founders. Also, it's kind of like, who do we put on the app? So we've got Paul McKenna, but who's going to do meditation and hypnosis? Well, meditation and breath work. And I've done a lot of breath work. I've done a lot of everything, but I've done a lot of breath work. And one of the guys that I most respect in this space is a guy called Alan Dolan, the breath guru, who works in conscious connected breath work, which is quite a transformational form of breath work. I said, who should I be speaking to? And he's like, well, you've got to check out this guy called Jamie Clements. He's, like a real hotshot in this area, but just completely authentic, incredible, and doing great work. And he's a young guy. He was an ex-fintech who had a kind of breakdown and decided he's going to change his life, and breathwork saved him. So he's got a really great story. He's young and good looking, and, got a great voice. So it's kind of what's not to like. Do you know what I mean? And that was really important to me. And that's what another thing to bear in mind when you're making content is like, who's delivering your content. Yeah. Paul McKenna has a great voice, that people can trust, and they're used to. So does Bear, and works both in the UK and the US. Yeah, so we knew that about Bear. We knew that about Paul McKenna. Jamie, I'm really confident. Because he's got the most wonderful voice. And then it was like, all right, who's going to do the meditation thing? And I also wanted racial diversity in the app. So I was looking for a person of color, really, in that mix. And there's a guy on Calm called Chibs Akereke who just he's like a stress and burnout kind of meditation specialist. And I'm like, wow, this guy's great. He's a Brit, but he lives in Australia. He's got like the best voice in the world. Yeah, his voice is just so relaxing. And so anyway, I spoke to him. I said, Chibs, I'd love you to kind of get involved with this. I think you're the perfect guy for it. The most important thing is that I just need to communicate with like ordinary blokes. Yeah. And he said, well, put it this way, Neil. I'm a 6'7" black man from a council estate in London. When I talk, people tend to listen. I just thought, fair play. Good point. Well made. And he's just great. And so when you listen to his kind of meditations on a app, he does this 28-day meditation challenge. And he starts by going, look, don't worry, guys. I'm not going to ask you to give up deodorant or grow a man bun, just to stick with me for a couple of minutes and see how we get on. I'm not even going to ask you to meditate.
Nice.
I'm just going to ask you to do this thing. And he's just brilliant at breaking down barriers. So, yeah, that's kind of how we built our team.
Wow. That's awesome, man. I love the attention to detail on the quality of someone's voice and their delivery versus knowing who your audience are. Like, I just think that's such a wonderful, I guess, concept to remember, that like the quality of your product and the stickiness of your product, what's going to give you that kind of daily active users or weekly active users versus monthly or, once a year or whatever, it's going to come down to a relationship between the person listening to the content and the person delivering the content, or their perceived relationship, right, of the person that's listening to the content. And I think that's where your creative background really comes in, isn't it? Because as someone from, producing TV shows and creating content for the public, you know innately the things that are going to click there. You know that the quality of someone's voice, the quality of that audio, the first 60 seconds of someone delivering that entire program is going to be where this whole thing lives or dies, like in the way that was delivered, like completely to the audience, completely with the audience in mind, like knowing full well, like busting exactly all of the objections that they already have, that they already have when they're turning this on. Like immediately those objections are busted and like that's such a lovely attention to detail. And I just think the whole thing is just incredibly needed, man. Like there's so much that I'm seeing at the minute with male mental health. We did an event with Newman the other week, like so like there's so much here that I think it's difficult sometimes, because you hear it's a man's world, and like of course there's been so much in like the Me Too movements and stuff that it's felt very difficult at sometimes. Just the word man has actually felt like a pejorative sometimes, like, and I know that's like, poor me, like saying that, and I don't want to, I don't want to take anything away from any of the much needed movements that have sort of led to that, but like, yeah, it has felt relatively difficult, that you often feel like a very, very small number of men are ruining it for the rest of us, kind of thing, and like ill feeling is spreading amongst like the general population towards men a lot, and it's difficult. I think it is difficult. There are things that perpetuate this mental health crisis that are getting deeper into society, and as you rightly say, biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide, and men are struggling. They don't communicate. They don't raise these issues. So there's so much good work to be done here that I just think, like, no wonder this is your life's work. Like, no wonder you're at that point of ikigai. No wonder you're feeling that point of purpose, because I can imagine that when you start creating something like this, like there's a lot of movement toward it. And I think that's such a nice thing. And particularly in business as well, like when you have that commercially, you start to feel the impact as well. Like you can actually then just divert that money back round, and that goes back into product development. It goes back into creating more content. It goes back into the marketing, which means it reaches more people. And it's that growth thing, like finishing on that piece, like you are someone who's wanted this growth of you and of your life and of your projects and of everything, and like you reached that one peak and then you thought, shit, I've got to go back down the mountain. The view isn't right here. The view's actually over there. That's the view I want. And you've had to climb that mountain again. You've sacrificed your position. You've sacrificed your status. You've sacrificed probably quite a lot of money that you've sunk into this as well. Like there's a lot of sacrifice that's gone into this, and like good on you, because I think you've done all of that sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. And I think that's so admirable. When I imagine that, on the bad days, you go back to those calculations and you're like, well, I could just stick my day rate up and do a few of this or whatever. But like, as you will much well know, like the rewards here are far greater than an extra zero in the bank account. And I think, Listen, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. For those people that want to learn more about Mettle, that I guess any man can go on the App Store and download it. But yeah, who's it for? How do they get it? And yeah, if anyone wants to actually get in touch with you and learn a bit more, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah. So just touching briefly on the kind of male movement. Yeah. Like the movements that have happened recently, like the Me Too movement, have been a brilliant thing, and have helped to redress some of the incorrect balance in the male-female. However, it has left a lot of men not knowing quite where to find their role models. So one of the byproducts of that
so true.
has been, and that's created toxic masculinity that has come in and filled that vacuum. And that's what we're trying to fight against. We want to create a positive masculinity. And timing is everything. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, it was very difficult to do things for men because it was almost, as you say, a pejorative term. So I think things have started to change. Things have settled down. People actually realize, whoa, there is a big problem going on here. We have to look at it and have to kind of treat men on their own terms. And even things like Caitlin Moran, the Britain's most famous feminist, wrote a book called "What Are We Going to Do About Men?" Or I can't remember the exact title, but it's like this is most prolific feminist coming out and say we need to be worried about these guys because as women over recent years we've made big gains, and as in her words, we've got to wear the trousers a lot more than before, but men are still rubbish at communicating. And I think she just, hit the nail on the head now. So now is the time when we need to be out there helping men and recognizing that, everybody should be equal and that we've got to stop this kind of toxic masculinity filling in vacuums for especially young men who don't know where to look for their role models. And it
is dangerous, actually, that because where men then choose to find their community leads to the Tate movement and things like that. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and we know that actually through working with our advisors that the worry is that could lead to a backlash against women.
Yeah, exactly.
So, from that toxic masculinity culture. And start to, undo some of the good work that's been done recently, which is, really worrying. And in terms of, what a struggle it is these days, it is hard doing what I'm doing. But as soon as, like last night, we've created a men's group for users of Mettle that men can just join, like a, kind of free thing with an online men's group. And, yesterday was a really tough day. I had a really hard day at work. It's a really hard thing running a tech business, as you'll know. But then I got on this call and I was like, what a day. But there was men on there and said, look, just wanted to thank you for doing this because this Mettle is getting me through some really, really tough times. And these are guys who are struggling with big things in their lives, same as everyone else. And they're saying that this has really helped me. And so I come off thinking, great, okay, then it's worth doing, and with the growth thing, like on the hardest days, I would say to myself, well, you asked for growth.
Yes.
How much can you handle?
Yes.
Because here's a lot of growth for you.
Yes. Yes.
So I have to kind of chuckle to myself. Okay, it's my number one value, and I'm getting it in buckets at the moment. So can I complain? Probably not. So, in terms of Mettle, METTLE, as I say, it's Mettle, that ability to kind of cope with difficulties and that sense of spirit and resilience. That's what we're kind of basing it on. Yeah, it's available on the App Store and on the Google Play Store. And, you can download it. It's a subscription app. Although we always say if people can't afford it, they can write us a physical letter with details on the website and can have it for free.
Wow.
So, we really encourage people to go and have a look at it. And, if you're a woman listening and there's a man in your life who you think this could help, maybe guide them towards it. And if people want to get in touch with me directly, then it's Neil, Neil, at bemettle, BEMETTLE.com. Always pleased to hear from people. Yeah.
Neil, thank you, sir. I appreciate you. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks, James. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for letting me rattle on for hours on end on a Friday afternoon.
No dramas, mate. All good.